Hey guys, tonight, we slip past the velvet curtains of time and land softly, very softly, in the gilded chambers of Versailles. The air is thick with incense candle smoke and something else that tickles your nose in all the wrong ways. You're wrapped in a feather-stuffed mattress, but don't get too cozy just yet. Because tonight, you're going to meet the man who ruled France with absolute power and absolutely no interest in soap. This is a tale about King Louis XIV, the Sun King. The monarch who built the most extravagant palace in Europe ruled for over 72 years and made high fashion out of filth. You're about to find out how he banned bathing for health reasons and why he ended up regretting it in more ways than one. And yes, you probably won't survive this century-long stench. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, where are you listening from? And what time is it in your corner of the world? Drop it in the comments. I love seeing this sleepy little history club grow across the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You open your eyes. Marble ceilings, golden drapes. You're in Versailles, the royal mega mansion that cost so much to build it, made peasants eat bark in winter. And yet, it stinks. Not metaphorically, literally. It's early morning. The hallways are buzzing. Courtiers in ruffled sleeves scurry past, not quite running, not quite walking. A man with a feathered hat sneezes. You see no tissues, only a lacy handkerchief. He waves vaguely in the air, like an aristocrat exorcising a demon. Then you hear it, the royal physician, declaring loudly that His Majesty shall not bathe this week or next week, possibly never again. The King Louis XIV has officially declared that water is a danger to the body. In fact, he hasn't taken a full body bath in, well, no one really remembers. And you somehow caught in the glittering bureaucracy of this scent-heavy civilization are expected to agree. Let's clear something up. It wasn't just the king. The whole of 17th century France was kind of in its U era. Doctors of the day believed that bathing opened up the pores, tiny invisible gateways through which disease, cold air, and Satan himself could sneak in. So they covered their pores in layers of perfume wigs and velvet. It's like trying to survive a plague by marinating in lavender. Louis XIV didn't invent the anti-bathing attitude, but oh, did he embrace it. As king, he set the tone for hygiene. Unfortunately, that tone was don't bother. He reportedly bathed twice in his entire life. Once as a child. Once when his doctor made him. And both times it made him feel weak. You know, the way hydration is just so draining. Still lying in bed, you catch your first whiff of courtly elegance. It's not soap. It's a combination of musk, stale wine, candle wax, and something musty that might be coming from the fireplace or someone's shoes. You can't be sure. The only thing you do know is that bathing isn't in the cards today. Someone opens the window and a breeze floats in. It's meant to freshen the room, but instead it spreads the smell. You cough into your sleeve. A nearby noblewoman fans herself and shoots you a look as if your disgust is the impolite part of this whole scene. Historians still argue whether Louis genuinely believed bathing was dangerous or whether he just couldn't be bothered. After all, he had other things on his mind. Wars, women, wigs. Soap was exactly high on the list. Outside his chambers, the daily ritual of the lever, the royal waking up ceremony, has begun. You hear the shuffle of dozens of nobles all desperate to catch a glimpse of the king putting on socks. Yes, really. Watching the king rise and get dressed was a ticket to power and favor. But no one talked about the smell. The king rises, stretches, and slips on an embroidered shirt, not fresh, just well-pressed. A valet dabs his forehead with scented cloth. Another adjusts his lace collar. You notice they're careful not to touch his skin directly. Probably smart. You follow along a sleepy phantom in this perfumed labyrinth as the Sun King begins his day. He's radiant, of course, jewels on his chest, gold buckles on his heels, and yet there's a red patch under his chin. Maybe a rash, or a bite. He winces just slightly. No one mentions it. Because no one wants to bring up the obvious that a man who rules millions of people might be rotting just a little under his royal robe. You trail him through corridors where candles burn even in daylight. Velvet curtains trap the heat, and everything smells like it's been sprayed with 10 kinds of floral desperation. You pass a guard standing stiff as a statue, nose twitching, like he's silently begging for mercy. Now here's the kicker: Versailles had no proper bathrooms. You heard that right. The most glamorous palace in Europe had chamber pots tucked behind curtains, and many courtiers relieved themselves in the gardens. The actual gardens. Imagine strolling past a rose bush only to step into the legacy of the Duke of Burgundy's breakfast. Still, the king had bigger concerns. He was the symbol of divine rule the state embodied. If he said dirt was divine, it was. If he said a bath was death, so be it. Nobody dared contradict him, even when that red rash spread. Unpleasant humors, the doctor would say. Treat with prayer, not water. And they did. Sort of. At lunch, you sit quietly behind the gilded throne watching him pick at meats and fruits so richly flavored they'd knock a modern foodie into a coma. He eats like a god, but smells like someone trapped one in a box for too long. Someone offers the king a wet cloth. He wipes his hands, not his face, certainly not his body, just a quick dab between bites. Then more perfume, always more perfume. And yet in this strange, sleepy spectacle, you begin to understand something this world, for all its odor and absurdity, believes in its own brilliance. They genuinely think that not bathing is a higher form of civilization. You know, like art. But sticky. By nightfall, the king returns to his chambers. Candles flicker. Incense curls. You curl up too on a couch that smells faintly of mildew and violets, and drift off to the sound of noblemen snoring through powdered noses and maids stepping lightly across creaky parquet floors. And in the darkness, one thought lingers if cleanliness is next to godliness. Versailles was definitely somewhere else. You wake up to the unmistakable sound of someone knocking over a pewter chamber pot. It sloshes. You do not investigate. Instead, you groggily rise, shuffle your slippered feet across the parquet floors, and find yourself wandering down one of Versailles' infamous hallways. You can't help but notice that the air already musty the night before has intensified into a kind of fragrance soup. Not just one smell, but layers upon layers. Picture someone pouring floral cologne over warm cheese, mixing in a hint of singed hair, and spritzing the whole thing with orange blossom water. Voila! Versailles, 7:00 a.m. You pass a servant crouching behind a curtain, hurriedly emptying something that definitely doesn't belong in polite company. He gives you a furtive glance as if hoping you didn't see it. You did. Everyone does. But no one says a word. That would be far too rude. Now you're among the nobility. Silk rustles like leaves in the wind. Wigs bob and sway like powdered pastries. And yet the unifying detail isn't visual, it's olfactory. Each nobleman you pass leaves behind a tail of aroma so powerful it could knock over a horse. Cologne eau de toilette, they call it. Though ironically, there are no toilets has become a full contact sport. The goal isn't to smell good. The goal is to not smell worse than everyone else. The perfume is so thick, It clings to your throat like syrup. One man wafts rose oil behind each ear under his wig and on his silk stockings. Another carries a hollowed-out pomander ball filled with clove-soaked cotton, swinging it like a priest with a censer. He holds it under his nose every few steps. You're not sure if it's to block other smells or because he's slowly losing the will to continue. Historians still argue whether this explosion of perfume was a necessity born from filth or an aesthetic choice. Likely both. Plumbing, not a thing. Water, a threat. But cologne that could be weaponized. And it was. You pass a lady-in-waiting reapplying jasmine oil to her wrists with a trembling hand. She's already used so much her sleeves are stained dark with it. You wonder how flammable everyone is. A careless candle could send half the cohort into a scented inferno. At the center of it all is the concept of plaisir, pleasure, luxury, indulgence. Even if your skin itches and your sheets smell like wet dog, as long as your scent says, "I am important," you've done your job. You pause before an ornate alcove where three noblemen are mid-conversation. One of them gestures toward his own ankle wrapped tightly in lavender-scented bandages. "For the vapors," he says. "They rise from the feet and poison the mind." The others nod solemnly. You try not to laugh. The funny thing is, they weren't totally wrong. Germ theory wasn't a thing yet, so people blamed smells called miasmas for disease. And to be fair, sometimes foul smells did coincide with illness. They just never guessed that it was the microscopic invaders on their hands and food and water bowls doing the actual harm. You turn a corner and step over a little. Surprise. No one cleans up immediately. That's not how Versailles works. There's a schedule and a hierarchy of filth. A noble's mess, that's for lower servants. A servant's mess, lower still. The lowest of the low are the scourers who come with buckets and herbs late in the day to chase away the evidence. Until then, best not to look down. Suddenly, a gust of wind sweeps down the corridor. Curtains billow. You catch a brief, fresh scent, possibly from the garden. A rare moment of nature. You savor it like a sip of cold water after a long hike. But it's fleeting. A nearby marquis adjusts his waistcoat and douses his armpits with bergamot oil, snapping you back into Versailles' olfactory reality. And yet beneath all this flamboyant filth lies a strange kind of brilliance. These people know they smell, but they've built an entire culture to cope with it. Gloves are perfumed, handkerchiefs soaked in violet water, hair powder mixed with crushed herbs. Even the furniture gets wiped down with scented wax, so you can sit in decadence without inhaling whatever's left behind from the last 3 duchesses. But not everyone is fooled. There's a rumor floating around court, one whispered behind fans and thick curtains, that a duchess fainted during a poetry recital, not from passion, but because someone's cologne mixed with a meat pie in a way that defied the laws of both cuisine and chemistry. The pie survived. The duchess, embarrassingly, did not. You reach the Salon of Apollo, a magnificent room dripping in gold leaf and muraled ceilings. Here the aristocracy gathers to gossip. And gossip they do. "Did you hear about the Duke's dog?" one baroness hisses. "It bathed in the fountain again. How unseemly." Another clutches her pearl necklace. "They say it's the 3rd time this week. Imagine getting wet on purpose." You catch yourself giggling and then quickly silence it. You're supposed to be invisible here. Just another ghost haunting the tapestries. You overhear a discussion about plumbing. Apparently, an architect once suggested adding pipes to carry fresh water into the palace. He was dismissed. Too Roman, someone sniffed. The Romans had bathhouses after all. Public ones. And public anything smells dangerously like equality. One fringe noble, perhaps emboldened by a bit too much wine, muses aloud. Perhaps if we understood how dirt works, we'd understand disease. His companions recoil as if he'd suggested burning down the chapel. You leave the room before they call for his exile. Back in the corridor, a footman walks by, carrying a gold-trimmed chamber pot, like it's a tray of pastries. He nods at you. You nod back. Mutual understanding, neither of you signed up for this. As the day stretches on, the perfumes intensify. Afternoon heat bakes the stone walls, awakening old smells trapped in corners and upholstery. You feel lightheaded, maybe a little too much rose oil, maybe not enough air. And then you spot something truly surprising. A young page, maybe 13, stepping into a side room with a small basin of water. Just water, no rose petals, no lemon peels. He closes the door carefully behind him, glancing around like he's smuggling contraband. You don't follow. You know what's happening. A wash. Just a quick splash. Maybe behind the ears. The kind of secret rebellion that might just keep him from losing his nose to mildew before adulthood. You smile. There's hope yet. You sit quietly now, half-shadowed behind a column near the royal bedchamber, watching the morning ritual unfold. Louis XIV is seated upright, bare-chested legs dangling slightly from his gold-framed bed. Around him stands a miniature audience of physicians, valets, and lords, each with a specific, ridiculous task. You'd think a king's doctor might come armed with a stethoscope and a chart, but no. These men carry bundles of lace silver sniffing spoons and tiny vials of miraculous tincture. This is not medicine as you know it. This is 17th century wellness theater, where sniffing your sweat is diagnostic and bathing is believed to kill you. The king sneezes once sharply. At least 4 men rush forward with perfumed napkins. One dabs his forehead. Another checks the temperature of his fingertips by pinching them delicately. A third murmurs, "The humors are restless today." Everyone nods as if this explains everything. You watch as the king is gently patted down, not washed with a warm cloth that has been scented with orange blossom and vinegar. No soap, no water. Just dabbing. It's the royal version of a dry shampoo, except with more ceremony and significantly less effectiveness. And why not use water? Because according to the best doctors of the French court, water doesn't cleanse, it contaminates. The skin, they say, is porous like soft cheese. Wash it with warm water, and you open the gates for illness to charge through like an invading army. Cold air, bad smells, even moral corruption, they all slip in through wet pores. It's not just dangerous, it's ungodly. That's why the king's washing routine is a dab to the face, a dusting of starch on his collarbone, and a smudge of pomade under his armpits. You've seen toddlers clean themselves more thoroughly after finger painting. Historians still argue whether these physicians truly believed their own advice or whether they were just too terrified to contradict the king's preferences. After all, Louis XIV wasn't just powerful, he was prideful. He believed himself chosen by God. And if he said dirt was divine, who were you to say otherwise? Still, even for a divine monarch, health concerns linger. The king's body is aging. He suffers from ulcers, headaches, digestive trouble, and the smell, it's getting worse. But rather than revise their beliefs, the doctors double down. One suggests the king's bad breath is due to a moist spleen. Another proposes a leeching behind the ears to draw out the inner rot. But absolutely no one suggests a full bath. Instead, they prescribe rituals. Burn rosemary daily, one says. Rub feet with goose fat. And basil leaves, says another. Sleep with a peeled onion under your pillow. You almost want to chime in with try soap, but that would surely get you escorted out of Versailles with a musket at your back. And what about the royal linens? Surely they get washed. Here's the twist. They get aired. as in hung out the window and flapped about, then re-perfumed, refolded, and returned to duty. Laundry isn't about removing dirt. It's about reshuffling it into new shapes and hoping no one notices. The king's undergarments changed, yes, but cleaned only occasionally. It's not unusual for garments to be reworn multiple times, freshened with rose water and a prayer. You watch as a servant smooths out a shirt with lavender oil and powdered chalk, then folds it with the same reverence you might give a sacred text. Outside, you hear the distant chiming of bells. A mass is starting in the palace chapel. Priests pray for France, for the king's health, for rain but not for baths. Inside, one doctor unrolls a parchment detailing the monarch's moisture index, a fictional scale meant to track whether the king's humors are too dry or too wet. You nearly burst out laughing. Instead, you bite your lip and focus on your breathing. Then comes your favorite part, the smell test. Each morning, the king is gently sniffed. That's right. A physician lowers his nose to the royal shoulder and inhales. Hints of vinegar and mildew he notes, but less than yesterday. The rest agree. Someone adds, "The lower back smells of musk." This is considered a compliment. And then, because no day in Versailles is complete without a bit of medical theater, the doctor pulls out a flask of powdered unicorn horn. Supposedly ground from the tusk of a narwhal, this cure is believed to neutralize poisons, boost virility, and prevent skin rot. A pinch is added to the king's morning wine. The rest is saved for later, just in case. One of the newer valets, a poor man from the provinces trying desperately to fit in, asks timidly whether the king might benefit from a tepid rinse, perhaps just the feet. The room freezes. A lace fan drops to the floor. The physician glares. The feet, he says coldly, are closest to hell. They must remain dry. No one speaks for a full 30 seconds. The valet is reassigned to spoon-warming duty. As the king is dressed, you trail the procession toward the Hall of Mirrors. His face is powdered cheeks, lightly rouged lips, dabbed with carmine. He looks radiant, untouchable, almost porcelain. But underneath all that, you know. You've seen the lace napkins. You've smelled the sheets. And yet there is something tragic about it. Because for all the sparkle and ceremony, Louis is just a man. A sick, aging man wrapped in incense and superstition, surrounded by advisors too afraid to hand him a bar of soap. A man so terrified of death slipping in through his skin that he's locked his body inside a tomb of perfume and powder. It's not just hygiene he's banished. It's vulnerability. He's built a world where even a splash of water is an act of treason. You find yourself wondering, when was the last time he touched water that wasn't scented or boiled beyond recognition? When was the last time he felt coolness on his skin without fear? You imagine him as a child playing near a stream, dipping his toes in laughing. Then the door creaks open. A servant brings in a fresh bouquet of hyacinths to mask the latest bout of royal aroma. Someone opens a window briefly. The wind stirs the king's wig. He sneezes. They dab again. You've wandered now into one of the smaller salon's rooms designed not for statecraft or ceremony, but for whispers, flirtations, and gloved fingertips brushing across perfumed wrists. Versailles may be a kingdom of incense and tradition, but at its core it thrives on something far more primal: desire. And tonight, you're in the thick of it. The air in this room is impossibly warm, thick with candle smoke, and the scent of 10 different musks fighting for dominance. Every velvet curtain traps heat like a theater's backstage, while powdered wigs bob to the rhythm of harpsichord music and scandalous giggles. Someone's laughter leaks into a cough, then returns to flirtation. You sit near the edge, invisible again, watching as nobles perform the delicate dance of courtly seduction. It's not about passion. It's about power, a well-placed glance, a compliment that could double as a threat. And always, always the perfume. Because in Versailles, love doesn't begin with a kiss, it begins with a sniff. You lean slightly forward as the Comtesse de Saint-Aignan drifts past, trailing a vapor cloud of ambergris bergamot and what might be boiled apple. Her dress is cut low enough to defy structural logic. Her fan flutters like a bird winging through fog. Across the room, the Marquis de Fronsac leans in already drenched in a heady mixture of musk and overconfidence. You're not sure which is stronger. Their eyes lock. The Marquis smiles. The Comtesse tilts her head, her powdered curls shedding tiny flakes like a spiced snowfall. The conversation begins in code compliments about poetry, gestures toward the moonlight. But the real language is chemical. Their scents mix in the warm air like rival armies testing the wind. Historians still argue whether courtship in Versailles was truly about love, or if it was simply another political game like chess with your sweat glands. Whatever the truth, the tactics were unmistakable. Everyone in the room has a scent strategy. For example, the Countess de la Motte is rumored to layer her perfume in 3 levels: citrus on her skin, floral in her wig, and musk on her underclothes. The goal: to create a symphony of attraction that unfolds slowly. As you move closer, the scent changes, like peeling back a decadent, smelly onion. Not to be outdone, the Duke of Maine has a beard pomade so strong it once made a chambermaid faint. The scent crushed violet petals bear fat and cinnamon. You breathe through your mouth now. In one corner, a pair of young nobles are composing a love letter, together their fingers grazing as they dip the quill. The parchment smells faintly of clove oil dabbed in the margins to preserve it from rodents and damp. She sighs. He quotes Racine. You resist the urge to quote deodorant instructions. Then there's the Princess de Guise standing near a window, sipping a cordial. Her breath smells like lavender brandy. Her gloves are dusted with powdered iris root. She waves at a passing gentleman who smells distinctly of damp velvet and sandalwood. Their eyes meet. He bows. She smiles. The scent flirtation has begun. And here's the twist: no one's actually clean. These people, these glittering avatars of elegance, haven't bathed in weeks, some in months. Their undergarments are perfumed but unchanged. Their wigs are stuffed with pomade that attracts lice. Their stockings cling to sweat-slicked legs, and yet they glide across the room like mythic creatures. You start to notice how no one sits for too long. Fabrics stick. Heat builds. The salons are more about movement than comfort. A constant flow like smoke curling through a chandelier. Lean and smile retreat. And always, always smell good enough to survive another round. You pass by a tapestry and overhear hushed voices from behind it. I think she actually washed, someone whispers. Gasps follow. With water, no, with milk and crushed rose petals. Just the elbows. Still, reckless. Laughter. The idea that someone might actually use water to become more desirable is almost comedic. Water is what peasants use. Water makes the skin too soft, too vulnerable. Better to layer perfume like armor. And yet, there are whispers of scandalous rebels. The Duke of Orleans, for instance, is said to have a secret copper tub. Once a month, he's rumored to lock himself away with buckets of hot water lemon peel and one brave valet. He emerges damp, refreshed, and allegedly glowing. Naturally, he tells no one. Because if you admit to bathing, what's next? Admitting to digestion. A sharp voice cuts through the room. Madame de Maintenon, the king's secret wife, perhaps the only person in Versailles who could smell like restraint. Her perfume is light, her clothes modest, and her eyes razor-sharp. She sweeps through the room, leaving the perfume-heavy crowd shifting awkwardly. She's known to favor spiritual purity over musk, a critic of indulgence, a woman who might actually wash her hands. You think you smell soap on her, just faintly. Then someone strikes a chord on the harpsichord, and the crowd refocuses. A small dog, trembling, beribboned, perfumed, yaps once, then vomits discreetly behind a curtain. No one flinches. You begin to notice something else now. The walls, the furniture. The room itself is scented. Curtains are steeped in lilac oil. Chairs have sachets sewn into the cushions. Even the chandeliers are occasionally anointed with melted amber and cinnamon wax. Versailles isn't just perfumed, it sweats fragrance, like a living organism desperately masking its own decay. Still, seductions continue. A gentleman fingers the ribbon of a lady's corset, his voice thick with honeyed charm. She giggles, then sneezes. Not from affection, from him. She waves her fan like she's trying to fend off a bear. Across the room, a duchess passes a sealed note to a marquis. He opens it. It smells of orange flower water and secrets. You catch a glimpse tonight. Garden maze. Midnight. You know the spot. It's 2 turns past the marble fountain, which incidentally smells like wet pennies and crushed lilies. As the night thickens and candles grow stubby, people start to peel away. One by one, ladies make their excuses. Gentlemen bow. The musky fog thins just a little. You follow someone toward the corridor, catching a final waft of powdered lilies and sweaty satin. The kind of smell you'll remember long after you leave. And yet, there's something oddly hypnotic about it. These people have turned seduction into theater, a stage of scent and silks, no soap required. You step back into the hall, ears ringing from laughter and perfume. You feel heavy, warm, dazzled, and maybe just a little nauseated. The morning begins with a trumpet call not for war, but for wardrobe. A procession of servants floods the halls of Versailles, their arms piled with silk lace, feathers, and gloves. Lots of gloves. You join the flow, drifting along with the current of fabric and perfume swept toward the beating heart of the French monarchy's daily performance. The royal court is waking up, and you're about to witness what a normal day looks like in a palace that hasn't met a bar of soap in decades. You pass a line of ladies waiting to enter the king's morning reception. Their corsets are already cinched tight, too tight, if you're honest, and under their powdered faces, you catch little glimmers of sweat. Tiny pearls of moisture sliding along their hairlines, quickly dabbed away with scented cloths. One woman has fainted. No one panics. A maid slips a little lavender under her nose. She revives. Everyone claps softly. You'd think life at court might be relaxed, but no, it's a full-contact lifestyle. From dawn until long after dusk, the nobles of Versailles participate in what could only be described as a very smelly theater production. They dress for drama, they posture for power, and they smell like a perfumery exploded during a chili cook-off. Gloves are not just fashion, they're shields. Everyone wears them, and each pair is doused in cologne. The idea is that if your hands stink like lilies or citrus peel, maybe no one will notice what's happening under your arms, or behind your ears, or inside your boots. Speaking of boots, you spot a young duke stumbling through the corridor, his calf-high leather shoes squeaking with each step. They've been rubbed with peppermint oil and laced with ribbon. Not for style, though everything here is style, but because his feet have started to blister from the heat. He walks like someone trying to keep a poker face while being chased by bees. And yet no one complains, because to complain at Versailles is to risk social death. Better to faint stylishly, to sweat discreetly, to waft your fan and murmur "Quel charme," even as the lining of your gown fuses to your spine. You wander into the antechamber where noblemen stand in stiff rows hoping to catch the king's eye. The competition is fierce, not in words, but in wigs. One gentleman sports a powdered monstrosity so large it brushes the ceiling beams. Another has a series of feathers cascading down one side, giving him the air of a nervous peacock. A breeze filters in through the open windows, and with it the reality of court life hits your nostrils. Beneath the perfume, always the perfume is the sweat. Heavy, earthy, slightly sour. Sweat trapped under velvet, sealed in brocade, pushed through lace. Historians still argue whether the aristocracy of Versailles actually noticed how badly things smelled. Some say they did, but pretended otherwise. Others believe they were so used to it, they stopped registering anything but drastic changes, like when the soup smelled better than the Duchess beside you. You step into the dining hall. Breakfast is being served, sweet pastries, preserved fruits, and wine. Always wine. Water is risky, you remember, even for the rich. But wine sweetened and spiced masks the flavor of its own decay. A liquid just as perfumed as the people drinking it. At the far end of the room, a courtier leans over a silver plate face, glistening with the early signs of a heat wave. He pats at his neck with a napkin and repowders his face without missing a bite. A woman beside him carefully restuffs her corset with lavender sachets, less for the scent, more to prevent mold. You follow a few nobles as they exit the meal and head toward the gardens. The famed Versailles gardens, with their fountains and floral geometries, offer the illusion of fresh air. The key word being illusion. Out here, away from the incense and indoor rot, you'd think people might find relief. But no. The sun reflects off powdered wigs like mirrors. Corsets grow damp under brocade, and the air is so still you could chew it. You notice how many fans are flapping gently, rhythmically, desperately. Fans are more than accessories. They're ventilation. They're flirtation. They're olfactory shields. And when wielded right, they can keep a noblewoman from passing out mid-curtsy. You find a shady corner beneath a marble statue of Venus. Nearby, two courtiers are arguing in hushed tones about who smells more like lemon and less like goat. One claims to use a new cologne made from crushed pear skins and ambergris. The other insists he has a servant who rubs his feet with thyme twice daily. You think about modern deodorant and nearly weep. Then comes the march to midday activities, card games, musical recitals, sometimes fencing lessons. You drift along with the tide through salon after salon, always accompanied by the faint hiss of silk on wood floors and the constant symphony of sniffing. Everyone sniffs, constantly. They sniff their gloves, their neighbors, their own sleeves, not rudely, just for survival. By the time you reach the portrait gallery, the real fatigue has set in. Not just yours, everyone's. A duchess is napping upright in a chaise, her wig slightly askew. A marquis leans heavily on a harpsichord, his cravat limp. Even the servants, always the quiet backbone of Versailles, are beginning to slow their pace. You sit beside a window and observe a curious scene: two noblewomen comparing stains on their gowns. One has a sweat blotch the size of a dessert plate. The other has something green creeping along her hem. "Oh, asparagus juice," she explains nonchalantly. "It spilled last week. I dabbed it with rose water." "Did it help?" the first woman asks. "Hard to say. It's fragrant." You marvel at the resilience. The sheer effort required to live like this, to appear immaculate, while your body rebels beneath 50 layers of cloth and starch and essential oils. And still the day goes on. Back in the corridors, a valet is wiping down a candelabrum with lemon oil. Not to clean it, to refresh the air. You pass another servant sprinkling crushed herbs across the threshold. The hallway smells like someone murdered a salad, And as you pause beneath a painting of the king triumphing over some unfortunate foreigner, you realize that this, the sweat, the perfume, the fans, the carefully controlled filth isn't accidental. It's design. Versailles was never meant to be comfortable. It was meant to be impressive, overwhelming. A scented dreamscape where you were too dizzy to question anything. And tomorrow, it'll begin again. The first sore appears just below the king's collarbone, small red, barely the size of a coin. It itches. Slightly. A minor nuisance at most. But in Versailles, even a pimple can spiral into political theater. You see it yourself the next morning during the lever, the royal wake-up ceremony. As Louis XIV raises his arm to don a fresh shirt, a valet catches a glimpse of the rash and freezes eyes wide like he's seen a ghost riding a goat. The other attendants notice too, but no one says a word, except the royal physician who clears his throat dramatically and declares His Majesty is experiencing an elevation in vital warmth. The rest nod as if he's just recited Newton's third law. No one says rash, no one says infection, and absolutely categorically, no one dares say the word bath. Instead, they prescribe the usual vinegar rubs, lace pads soaked in clove oil, and long-winded lectures about imbalanced humors. Louis, to his credit, doesn't complain yet. But you see it on his face, the tight wince as the cloth touches his skin, the faint lines at the corner of his eyes, when he's supposed to be smiling. By week's end, the sore has multiplied. First 3, then 7. One angry cluster blooms near his jawline. A physician pokes it with a golden spoon, sniffs thoughtfully, and mutters, "The spleen is clearly agitated." Another suggests leech therapy. You don't know much about medicine, but watching a man slap a blood-sucking worm on the king's shoulder feels like the opposite of helpful. You follow the royal party through the Hall of Mirrors. The courtiers still bow and grin, but their eyes flicker to the bandage under Louis's collar. The rumors begin that afternoon. Has His Majesty been cursed? Perhaps he ate unripe figs. I heard he stared too long into a mirror during Lent. You pass a servant mumbling that it's God's revenge for Louis banning bathing. Another swears the king's wig is cursed, stitched with hair stolen from a condemned witch. Everyone has a theory. No one suggests hygiene. Why? Because bathing is still considered medical treason. The idea that water might soothe, heal, or cleanse is so contrary to Versailles dogma that it's easier to believe in magical wigs than microbial life. Historians still argue whether Louis's advisors were truly ignorant or whether they deliberately avoided the obvious in order to stay in his favor. Some records suggest a handful of physicians quietly recommended tepid sponging. They were promptly replaced. Meanwhile, the royal discomfort deepens. Louis scratches discreetly during council meetings. His gait shifts slightly, as if his garments are chafing against something raw. At meals, he dabs at his neck with napkins now more red than white. His appetite wanes, and yet to the public, he must remain the divine embodiment of France, unshaken, unblemished, and utterly dry. You trail him one afternoon into the gardens. He walks more slowly now, flanked by perfumed guards. A bishop murmurs blessings beneath his breath. You wonder if it's prayer or panic. The king pauses near a fountain. You think for just a moment he might touch the water. He doesn't. Instead, he waves away a servant offering rose water and mutters, "The scent offends me." You're not sure whether he means the rose or the memory of water itself. At night, he wakes often. Servants report muffled groans, wet linens, angry scratching. The sores weep. The doctors apply more herbs, more linen, more nonsense. One suggests applying crushed pearls. Another tries a paste made from roasted turnips and pigeon droppings. You can't tell if it's satire or actual medical advice. The court doesn't laugh. In a fit of desperation, the king's confessor recommends fasting and prayer. Louis complies. Not because he's pious, but because it's the only prescription that doesn't physically hurt. You catch sight of him again during the evening audience. The makeup is thicker now. Layers of white paste hide the blemishes, but the overall effect is uncanny, like a wax statue melting under candlelight. His courtiers pretend not to notice. One loudly praises the king's radiance. Another comments on the rosy glow of health. You wonder if they all share the same hallucination. Then, behind a folding screen, you overhear something unusual. A young apothecary whispers to a maid, "If only he'd soak. Just once. Just soak. The inflammation would ease." The maid looks around nervously. You can't say that. But it's true. You'll end up in the Bastille with soap bars stuffed in your mouth. They laugh, but not with humor. The next day, a new theory surfaces. The king's condition is being caused by lunar imbalance. A physician arrives with a sack of powdered moonstones. Another suggests sleeping with one's head pointed toward Jerusalem. Louis, half delirious from pain, agrees to both. And yet, not a single person proposes a bath. Because here at Versailles, water is the enemy. You remember watching the peasants outside the palace walls, simple folk who splash in streams, scrub with coarse soap, and live without wigs or wine-soaked gloves. They smell of sweat and soil and honesty. Meanwhile, inside the palace, the king is rotting beneath roses. One afternoon, you pass the royal tailor struggling to adjust a new collar. The fabric won't sit right. The king winces as it brushes his neck. Too stiff, Louis snaps. It's silk, sire. Then cut it. The tailor bows, slicing the collar with gold-handled scissors. Behind him, a valet silently replaces the soiled neck ruffle with a new one. Lavender-scented, dotted with powder. Still the king twitches. Still the sores spread. And every time he scratches, no one dares speak the obvious. Instead, they shuffle papers bow lower and apply more clove oil. The smell is unbearable. The perfume has become a wall between the king and the world, a wall built to keep out water, but now keeping in decay. Later that night, you overhear one of the doctors muttering near the fire. There is rot beneath that crown. You wonder if he means the rash, or everything else. You're back in the grand ballroom now, where candlelight flickers against mirrored walls and silk gowns swish like waves across a perfumed sea. It's a masquerade tonight, faces, hidden identities, teased, everything dipped in wine and mystery. From the outside, it looks like magic. But once you step through the doorway, the illusion begins to itch. Literally. Welcome to the peak of protocol and the height of skin irritation. Everywhere you turn, someone is scratching. Discreetly, of course. One noblewoman delicately digs at her shoulder with the handle of her fan. A viscount shifts his cravat every 10 seconds, trying to mask the growing dampness of his powdered neck. Behind a cluster of dancers, a marquis you recognize from this morning's lever discreetly swipes at his inner thigh and winces like he's just been stabbed. It's not passion, it's pox pimples and 100 varieties of undiagnosed rashes crawling their way beneath the layers of courtly splendor. The problem. Everything here chafes. Corsets are cinched too tight. Wigs trap sweat like domed greenhouses, and undergarments rarely change. Between the perfumes, the powders, and the absolute banishment of water, the bodies beneath these gowns are waging a quiet war against their own skin. And still the music plays. The violinist's bow dances, and so do the guests, some feverishly, others stiffly, likely due to unspoken lesions. You drift behind a column where a young nobleman with painted lips and a rhinestone mask is scratching with increasing desperation. He catches your eye, flashes a sheepish grin, and mutters, "Mosquitoes." But you both know better. Historians still argue whether the court's persistent skin problems were the result of hygiene or fashion. Probably both. Most nobles here haven't bathed in months, and their wardrobes include materials like unwashed wool, stiffened linen, and brocade dyed with mercury. Yes, mercury. And if the fabrics don't get you, the lice will. You pause by the buffet where gloved hands pluck candied fruits and lemon tarts. One lady reaches too far, and her sleeve slips, revealing a reddish rash blooming near her elbow. She sees your glance, quickly covers it, and laughs. Too much saffron at supper. That's the polite fiction anyway. No one talks about the real cause, because to acknowledge the itching would be to acknowledge the filth. And acknowledging the filth might lead someone to say the unthinkable should we bathe. Instead, they cling to ceremony. As you move into the card salon, the atmosphere thickens, not just with cigar smoke and candle grease, but with unspoken discomfort. The king isn't here tonight. His rash has worsened. Rumors swirl that his back is being poulticed with honey and pheasant feathers. Meanwhile, the rest of court smiles tightly and scratches politely, upholding the illusion of grace. You pass a seated gentleman, his gloved hand trembling slightly as he bets a gold coin on a hand of piquet. You glance at his fingers, blistered, cracked. He drops a card and winces. "Dry air," he says through clenched teeth. Another lie. The protocol demands dignity at all costs. Even if your scalp is crawling, even if your thighs are raw, even if your armpits feel like they've been salted and roasted, you never let the discomfort show. One duchess famously once fainted in the middle of a dance. Her maid later confessed that her corset had been laced so tightly and for so many days that an open sore had formed beneath her ribs. It had begun to fester. She didn't complain, not even when it started bleeding. Instead, she powdered over the stain and made sure to faint toward the handsomest man in the room. That's Versailles. You spot Madame de Tourzel sitting near a window. She's fanning herself lazily, but every few seconds her hand dips toward her knee, gently scratching through silk. You approach, curious. She lowers her voice. "They say it's mites in the drapes," she whispers. "Others say the pomade's gone rancid. I say..." She pauses. "It's the wigs." You nod solemnly. She continues. "We wear them all day, sometimes all night, powdered with flour, crawling with little things. You feel them behind your ears. At first you think it's your imagination." She stares into her drink, then adds, "Then you wake up with bite marks. You suddenly feel itchy. The room swirls with color and music, but the undercurrent is unmistakable discomfort. Everyone moves just a little too much, shifts a little too often. One gentleman near this balcony dances with such awkward stiffness you suspect his shoes are hiding more than bunions. Someone coughs and heads turn, but not for plague. It's the perfume again, the mix of musk and mildew, like sweating inside a cake. You step outside briefly for air. The night is cool, crisp, mercifully neutral. You take a breath that doesn't taste like violet oil. In the distance, frogs croak near the fountains. You're about to relax when you hear someone behind a bush muttering curses. It's a count, trousers down, knees bent, scratching ferociously at what must surely be an unspeakable rash. You back away silently. There are no doctors out here, no apothecaries, just noble dignity being clawed apart beneath the stars. And yet when you return inside, the ball continues undisturbed. Back in the hall, a group of ladies are gathered near a mirror, comparing skin tones. One points at a red patch on her cheek. "Charm from the king's smile," she jokes. They all laugh, but one of them doesn't. She looks at her reflection, lifts her wig slightly, and examines the red welts on her scalp. She doesn't laugh. She quietly powders them, adjusts her hair, and rejoins the group with a tight-lipped smile. You realize then that Versailles doesn't deny discomfort. It decorates it. Even illness must wear a ribbon. Even pox gets powdered. And so they dance, all night. You leave the palace now just for a while. Through gilded gates and sculpted hedges, past marble fountains and whispering trees. You follow the road that bends away from Versailles, away from the clouds of perfume and lace-lined sickness. And as the palace shrinks behind you, something else begins to rise. Fresh air. Real, honest, undiluted air. You walk until the golden gravel gives way to dirt, and the dirt becomes soft grass, and the grass opens up to rolling hills and dandelions. This is the French countryside. Peasant land, farmland, a place nobles only visit through paintings, pastoral scenes framed in gold leaf and hung beside chandeliers. And here, dear listener, people bathe. You catch your first glimpse by a slow-moving river. Children splash in the shallows. Women stand waist-deep in water scrubbing linens on smooth stones. A man dunks his whole head under emerging with a triumphant gasp. They laugh. They joke. And most remarkably, they do not smell like melted honey cakes and anxiety. They smell like people. You settle on a shaded rock and watch this curious ritual unfold. A woman rinses her arms, her neck, even between her toes. A boy scrubs behind his ears. No perfumes, no gloves, no scented sachets, just water. The very thing Versailles fears most. And yet no one here seems to be dying from it. Historians still argue whether the peasantry bathed more often than the aristocracy. Some claim they did out of necessity river access physical labor dirt under the nails. Others say it was seasonal or dependent on local customs. But most agree peasants weren't terrified of water. Not like the nobles. Back in Versailles, washing with river water is unthinkable. It's associated with poverty, with wildness, with being uncivilized. To the court, cleanliness must come from refinement, powder, linen, rose oil ritual. Not a cold dunk in a stream with frogs watching. You remember a conversation you overheard in the palace? "Did you know they bathe in lakes?" one duchess had said, fanning herself dramatically. "Oh, my stars!" another gasped. And in front of each other, they don't even use perfume. That's not bathing. That's just wet desperation. They laughed. But here, under the sun, watching a girl carefully untangle her hair. In the breeze, you wonder who really has it right. The irony, of course, is that many of these so-called unwashed peasants are physically healthier than their noble counterparts. Their skin isn't covered in sores. Their scalps aren't infested with powder lice. Their bodies, while weathered, aren't slowly rotting beneath perfumed gauze. They get dirty, yes, but they get clean too. And when they stink, they know they stink, so they wash. Versailles, on the other hand, is caught in a grand scented denial. You make your way through a village square, past a bakery, a blacksmith, a well. A group of men sit on wooden benches, wiping their brows with coarse cloth. Their shirts are patched, their boots dusty, but you catch no stench trailing them. One of them notices your fine shoes borrowed from the palace and smirks. From Versailles, he asks, eyebrow raised. You nod. He leans toward you. You people smell funny, he says, and then he goes back to drinking. You pass a little farmhouse where two children scrub each other with soap made of lye and animal fat. It smells sharp, earthy, not pleasant, but functional. A bar sits on a nearby stump cracked from use. You touch it just to be sure it's real. Soap. Honest-to-goodness soap. Not made with ambergris or mixed with imported spices. Just soap. And it works. Later you pass a church where villagers are gathering. It's Sunday. Everyone's dressed in their cleanest garments. Some still have damp hair from their morning wash. They bow their heads in prayer, and not a single person faints from the odor of the pews. Imagine that. You can't help but chuckle softly. Back at Versailles, the king has probably just finished his third napkin dab of the day. His courtiers are repowdering their sores, reperfuming their sleeves, and holding back sneezes behind lavender-stuffed kerchiefs. They call it refinement. But it's not about cleanliness. It's about distance. Distance from nature, from peasants, from water, from the body itself. Because to a noble to be too clean in the peasant way is to flirt with humility. To be aware of your own stink is to admit you're made of the same meat and sweat as the laborers outside your gates. Better than to pretend the stench doesn't exist. To build a scented palace so thick with incense and protocol that you forget there's a world beyond your own powdered nose. As you sit beneath a fig tree watching children chase each other barefoot and giggling. You wonder if anyone in Versailles ever misses this. Do they remember the feel of cool water on sunburned skin, the tickle of river mud between their toes, the way your hair smells after drying in the wind? You doubt it. And if they do remember, they probably pay a servant to forget it for them. Still, a strange truth lingers in the air. The dirtiest nobles in France live in the cleanest rooms, and the cleanest people in France sleep on straw. A paradox, yes. But then again, so is a palace that fears water. The curtains flutter softly as you step into one of Versailles' smaller salons, a hidden chamber of velvet shadows and flickering candlelight. This is where truths come to wrinkle. The air is thick, not just with perfume, but with secrets. The kind of whispered rot that no amount of rose water can cleanse. You're not here for politics tonight. You're here for gossip. And oh, the things they say behind scented curtains. Two ladies in waiting recline on a settee, wine glasses trembling slightly in their gloved hands. One is fanning herself not from heat, but from laughter. "Did you smell the Duchess of Boufflers at the opera last night?" she whispers. The other leans in, eyes wide. "Smell, darling. I survived her." They both collapse into silent, shoulder-shaking giggles, careful not to attract attention. You drift closer, invisible as always. They're talking about the linen incident. A maid was seen dragging the Duchess's bedding, moldy and reeking, through the servants' quarters in search of dry air and divine intervention. It hadn't been changed in 6 weeks. The cause, a romantic fever, said the official line. The unofficial one, fermentation. The Duchess had been sleeping with a young count who himself was known to sweat like a boiled onion. The details vary. One version claims the sheets fused to her legs. Another says mushrooms had begun to form in the creases. Historians still argue whether any of it is true, but in Versailles, plausibility is less important than perfume, and perfume rarely masks scandal. Someone leans through the curtain from another salon. "I heard she tried to bathe afterward." The gasps are instant, scandalous, delicious. Not a full bath, surely. No, no. A rinse, behind the ears, with lavender water. Still. That's how it starts. And just like that, the room shifts. Not with movement, but with attention. The Duchess, no longer just a punchline, has entered a special tier of danger. Someone who may or may not have flirted with cleanliness. You make your way down the corridor and catch more whispers. A valet speaks to a kitchen boy, voice low and shaking. The Marquis de Chatillon has a private tub, he says. Copper, hidden in a closet. They say he sits in it once a month with chamomile and boiled milk. Boiled milk for the skin. The kitchen boy shudders. Sounds French. The truth is, secret bathing has become a kind of underground vice. Nobles sneak it the way others sneak lovers or pamphlets of forbidden philosophy. A quick rinse in a basin, a cloth wiped down the back in the dark. Never a full-body soak, of course, that would be madness. But a splash here, a damp rag there, forbidden fruit. You duck into a sitting room where the Comte de Rieux is holding court with a handful of admirers. He's reclining, shirt half undone, eyes half lidded, speaking in the slow cadence of someone who wants every syllable to smell expensive. You know the Turks bathe every day, he says, voice silky. Someone gasps. They sit in steam, he continues, and let their pores open like flowers. They say it brings clarity, purity. A woman at his side fans herself nervously. But they're heathens. He purrs. Perhaps. But they do have lovely skin. A moment of silence. Then someone dares to ask, "Have you ever?" The Count sips his wine, says nothing. That's all it takes. By morning there will be 5 versions of this conversation, each more exaggerated than the last. In one he bathes weekly. In another he hires Turkish servants to scrub him in secret. In the most salacious version, he bathes with someone. You move on, stepping past a linen-covered table where a maid is pressing handkerchiefs with hot irons. She hums as she works, but her hands move fast. Too fast. You realize she's burning out mildew spots. Not from servants' cloths, but from the Queen's. You glance at the stack. Yellowed, damp, gently fragrant, but only because someone drenched them in lily water. The Queen is not above the mildew, it seems. In a nearby alcove, a pair of noblewomen are whispering over a teacup. One claims her cousin has invented a device, a portable bidet, discreet and silver-plated. She uses it daily, she says proudly, but only below the waist, and only during full moons. The other clutches her necklace. That's practically Protestant. And then, like clockwork, the most shocking rumor of the evening surfaces. A footman has been dismissed. Why, caught with soap, in his satchel, wrapped in cloth, smelling faintly of mint. They say he was planning to use it on himself during his break, in the garden, in the shadow of a statue, naked. You feel the room thrum with half horror, half envy. He's been sent to the country, possibly to the army, possibly to the colonies. Either way, he's gone. Washed out of Versailles like dirt off a duchess's boot. You return to the ballroom. The dancers are still twirling, but you can tell the whispers are spreading, like mold behind velvet. Madame de Clichy's sheets, the Comte's tub, the footman's soap, a noble who rinses his feet after fencing, a duchess who sleeps with damp cloths pressed to her stomach for circulation. Each rumor is met with mockery, then intrigue, then imitation. Quietly, cautiously. Because in a world where water is danger to touch, it is rebellion, and rebellion in Versailles is intoxicating. You lean against the wall and breathe in the musk and mystery, knowing full well that behind every powdered collar is a secret cloth, a hidden basin, a guilty splash, and behind every fan a whisper. The marble bust of Emperor Hadrian stares down at you from its pedestal in the Salon de Diane. His carved brows furrow eternally, his toga pristine, his curls immaculate. It's a copy, of course, one of many statues the king commissioned to evoke the majesty of ancient Rome. But unlike the real Hadrian, this version smells faintly of mildew and rose oil. You glance around the room. Columns, mosaics, painted ceilings, all tributes to the Roman Empire. But something's missing. Something Louis XIV would never allow, no matter how much he admired Caesar's fashion sense or Augustus's power. Public baths. You heard it yourself whispered during a council meeting held just days ago. One of the king's younger advisors recently returned from Italy dared to suggest that Paris build public bathhouses. A gesture to health, he called it. A nod to the ancients. He even quoted Virgil. Bad move. Louis's face didn't move, but his wig seemed to stiffen. The court's silence was immediate and thunderous. The advisor was thanked and never invited back. Because here's the secret Versailles never admits: the king isn't just avoiding baths for his health. He's avoiding public bathing for his throne. To understand why, you must remember that Rome wasn't just clean, it was communal. The baths weren't just for hygiene. They were meeting places, debating halls, social mixers, places where commoners and aristocrats, merchants and senators all stripped down and shared the same water. Naked, equal. And if there's one word Versailles cannot tolerate, it's equal. You walk through the hall of mirrors, now your shoes clicking softly on polished marble. Each mirror reflects a different version of the king, glorious, solitary, untouchable. This is how Louis likes to be seen, not in a tub beside a grocer from Lyon. Historians still debate whether Louis's fear of Roman baths was political paranoia or savvy strategy. But one thing is clear: the Sun King saw cleanliness as a threat. Because with cleanliness came clarity, and with clarity came questions. Like, why are the peasants so filthy? Why do nobles wear 16 layers of unwashed wool? Why does the king smell like boiled ambergris and gout? And most dangerously, if I can be clean, why should I remain dirty? You step into the palace library, where a dusty copy of De Architectura by Vitruvius sits unopened. Louis had it translated but never fully read, probably because of the chapter on bathhouse design. Heated marble floors, flowing fountains, soap. Soap. The word has a strange power here. You've heard it used as an insult. He's gone soft, always washing. Or a euphemism: she's bathed, hasn't she? Often followed by raised eyebrows and lowered voices. In the Palace Theater, a new comedy is being rehearsed. One character, played by a servant in drag, accidentally falls into a fountain and emerges scrubbed clean. The audience howls with laughter. The moral of the play: cleanliness leads to ruin. The clean character is shunned, ridiculed, eventually married off to a Dutchman. Tragic. You exit through a side hall and catch a glimpse of the king himself, seated at a table examining a tapestry of the baths of Caracalla. His brow is furrowed. A physician leans in to whisper something, probably about his sores. The king waves him off, and then in a moment that seems to stretch across centuries, Louis reaches out and touches the image of the Roman bath. Just with his fingertips, he holds them there, then pulls away quickly as if burned. That night, a quiet order goes out: no more tapestries of Roman baths, no more discussion of aqueducts. The palace fountains will flow, but only for beauty, not for bathing. And yet the fear lingers. Louis knows what happened to Rome, how the emperors became lazy, how the people grew restless, how citizens gathered in the baths, whispered in steam, questioned power. Plots were hatched in hot water. Uprisings simmered in soap bubbles. You imagine what Versailles would look like with a public bath. A marble courtyard, steam rising through ivy. Nobles and servants naked but equal, trading gossip over warm stone benches. An elderly count floating beside a pastry chef. The king himself soaking his feet beside a poet. It would be chaos. Or worse, democracy. That's the real reason the bathhouses never come. Because in a world built on illusion, nothing is more dangerous than honesty. And nothing peels away pretense faster than a hot bath. Back in the palace kitchens, a cook wipes his brow with a damp cloth and mutters, "They say the Romans fell because they cleaned too much." A butcher laughs. "I say, we'll fall because we stink too much." The baker adds, "At least they had drains." Laughter echoes, but quietly. In the servants' quarters, you find a tattered drawing of a bathhouse sketched by a young scullery maid. She's added notes: marble floor soap, made from tallow, drain here. She hides it under her mattress. It's her dream. Upstairs, the king retires to his chambers. His rash is worse. The vinegar compress has failed. The linen is stained. But no bath. Never a bath. Instead, the windows are opened wide, and somewhere in the distance a fountain trickles. Useless, beautiful, silent. You're in the Salle du Conseil now, where gold-framed portraits watch over a room full of starched collars, powdered wigs, and fidgeting men trying very hard not to scratch. Welcome to the upper chamber of itchy politics. The long walnut table is polished to a dull gleam, and at one end sits a cardinal coughing discreetly into his lace handkerchief. At the other, a minister of finance blinks through a haze of scented smoke, his face turning the shade of old cheese under a wig that's clearly been hosting something with legs, and between them papers, reports, ideas, some radical, some barely legible beneath perfume blotches and wine stains. You move quietly behind a velvet curtain, not even bothering to hold your breath. This time the incense in here is so thick it's like inhaling potpourri stew. Today's topic, reform. Not the dangerous kind, mind you. Nothing like democracy or land redistribution. Just the hint of change. A light dusting of modernity over the crusted tart that is the French monarchy. One minister dares to suggest cautiously that perhaps the court should adopt hygienic protocols during public ceremonies. Not full bathing, he assures them, but wiping the neck with warm water. A gesture. Another man nods. The Austrian court permits occasional sponging. A third mutters, "We're not Austrians, we're French." The room murmurs. You watch as one counselor, Count d'Orville, scratches his leg with the handle of his snuff box. His footman later told you he has a rash so severe it's visible through his stockings. But he refuses treatment. To confess to discomfort is to reveal weakness, and revealing weakness, that's for the English. Historians still argue whether France's upper echelons believed in their own rot-resistant superiority, or if they simply feared being the first to admit they stank. Tradition says the chancellor, now clearing his throat with dignity, is what separates us from the mob. He says this while discreetly using his periwig ribbon to scratch under his ear. The monarchy, after all, isn't just a governing system. It's a scent, a posture, a polished illusion, a divine right powdered so heavily that to wash it away might reveal, well, a person. And no one wants that. You remember the gardener just yesterday who'd been caught humming an old revolutionary tune while hosing mud off his boots. The guards reported it immediately. Washing said the report encourages rebellion. It sounds ridiculous, but in this room, it's doctrine. Still, Parliament has begun to notice. Not just the smell, but the danger of the smell. Disease is rising. The people whisper. And nobles who scratch in public are suddenly not just undignified, but suspicious. Last week, a duke was accused of treason simply because he asked for a clean shirt daily. It's a slippery slope, said one marquis. First it's shirts, then it's democracy. So the tension tightens. The king, of course, remains untouched. He doesn't attend these sessions. But his shadow looms over every chair, every decision, every perfumed cough. Because as long as Louis XIV refuses to bathe, no one else can. He is the state, the Sun King. If he so much as rinses his elbow, the celestial balance might collapse. Meanwhile, one daring proposal circulates a petition sent from a provincial assembly, suggesting the construction of a royal cleansing chamber separate from the palace, a kind of royal bathhouse in exile. It is shredded before lunch. You overhear one counselor mutter, "We can't allow sanitation to become fashionable." That's how Rome fell. Another adds, "Or worse, Amsterdam." They shudder. And yet when the curtains draw back and the meeting adjourns, you watch the men rise stiffly, bow to one another, and quickly retreat to private corners to scratch behind tapestries beneath stairwells inside coat rooms. Dignity has a schedule, and it only lasts as long as there's someone watching. Out in the courtyards, the lower officials gather. Clerks, pages, young nobles still earning their rank. Here the rules bend just a little. You hear mutterings of secret soap. A boy whispers of a friend who boils herbs in his room and breathes the steam at night for his pores. Another speaks of washing his hands with lemon water after touching coins. Rebels, all of them. Tiny acts of defiance under powdered noses. You step into the servants' wing and find a chambermaid bent over a copper bowl. She's dabbing a cloth in warm wine and gently patting her face. It smells sharp and sour, but she looks almost clean. "I use vinegar," she tells you without looking up. "Don't tell the steward." "Why?" she shrugs. "He says water makes us too aware of ourselves." And maybe that's it. Maybe the reason Versailles clings so tightly to its rituals, its perfumes and powders, its itches and its illusions, is because to be clean is to become self-aware. To realize your body is a body. Mortal, fallible, flesh and sweat and failure. And for a monarchy claiming divine right, that's the most dangerous truth of all. You pass by the chapel where priests burn incense so thick it curls like dragon's breath toward the rafters. You wonder what sins it's meant to hide today. Not lust, not greed, just the slow decay of tradition, the smell of change, and the scratching sound of politics in denial. It's morning in Versailles again, and the palace stirs not with the crisp scent of dew or the fresh air of dawn, but with disappointment. Candle wax, wine from last night, and something else, something lingering and strangely hollow. You can sense it before you even see him. The king has stopped noticing the smell. You enter his chambers quietly, slipping between two valets, brushing dust off his silk chair legs with squirrel hair brushes. The great Louis XIV is perched before a gilded mirror, being delicately powdered by trembling hands. His posture is regal, his robe flawless, but there's something different in the air today. And it's not the scent of clove oil or the usual violet haze. It's absence, the absence of reaction. A valet accidentally uncorks a bottle of musk too close to the king's nose. The stench hits you like a wall. It smells like someone roasted a saddle inside a glove drawer. But the king, nothing. No flinch. No lifted brow. Just blank indifference. The room pauses. The physician steps forward with theatrical calm. "How does your majesty find the new blend?" he asks, voice fluttering like lace. Louis dabs his upper lip, considers for a moment, then says flatly, "Acceptable." A flicker of panic passes between the courtiers. One clears his throat. Another fumbles a fan. He didn't smell it, someone mouths silently across the room. And so the whispers begin. The king's nose, once feared, obeyed and consulted like a royal oracle, is failing. Historians still debate when exactly Louis lost his sense of smell. Some say it was gradual, worn down by decades of incense powder and disease. Others believe it happened suddenly after a particularly nasty head cold. A few even claim it was a secret punishment from God. But whatever the cause, the result is terrifying. Because if the king can no longer smell, how will he rule? It's not just about hygiene. In Versailles, scent is hierarchy, power, trust. Loyalty is measured in how sweetly you smell in his presence. Enemies reek of vinegar. Allies wear jasmine. The very act of not offending his nose is political currency. Now the entire court is destabilized. You wander into the salon where the king usually greets dignitaries. The atmosphere is oddly tense. Nobles are adjusting their colognes mid-conversation. Some are layering 3, 4, even 5 cents, hoping to provoke a response. One lady is nearly suffocated by her own orange blossom fog. No one comments on the silent truth. Louis doesn't notice any of them. You pass a group of ladies in waiting hiding behind a curtain, panic thick in their whispers. If His Majesty can't smell, one hisses, then what's the point of this? She lifts her sleeve, revealing a handkerchief soaked in rose oil. I've spent 12 livres a week on this. For years. Another scoffs. I've had lavender sachets sewn into every corset. I smell like a nun's funeral. Maybe he's just too polite to say we stink, offers a third. They all look horrified. You descend a back staircase and overhear 2 servants discussing a failed test from the night before. A marquis reportedly placed a decaying pear on the king's nightstand, hidden beneath a silk doily. It went untouched, one says. Untouched and unnoticed, the other replies. 3 days. They shudder. Later that afternoon, you slip into the royal menagerie, where courtiers gather for a less formal audience. Louis stands beside a peacock, its feathers shivering in the breeze. A noble leans in with a bold move. He wears nothing. No perfume. Just his own scent scrubbed with rough soap and cold water. It's a gamble, a radical shift. Louis doesn't flinch. He doesn't inhale. He simply nods, distracted. The noble glances around in triumph, half smug, half terrified. For a moment it looks like the old order might collapse, like natural scent might return to fashion. But the rest of the court isn't ready. Another noble arrives, drenched in bergamot and pine tar. It smells like a haunted forest. The king still shows no sign. A few begin whispering the unthinkable. If he cannot smell, says a bishop over wine that night, perhaps he can no longer sense God's will. The table falls silent. Even his most loyal advisors are worried now. Because if the king's nose fails, it calls into question his judgment, his divinity, his taste. Was his perfume guidance ever true? Did he ever detect the corruption of those around him, or has he simply been politely nodding through a fog of floral lies? You return to the royal quarters as the day fades. The king reclines on a velvet chaise. The sores on his neck have darkened. A physician applies a poultice made of powdered lily and duck bile. Louis barely registers the touch. A maid sprinkles petals on the floor. Someone burns sandalwood nearby. Still nothing. His eyes drift. He inhales without meaning to. Exhales without reaction. His nose is no longer royal, and the court is panicking. One enterprising noblewoman determined to test the limits walks past him wearing the same perfume as the queen. It's a breach of etiquette so bold it borders on treason. Louis doesn't blink. The woman's eyes light up. The age of scent is ending. You sense it in the shifting alliances, the quiet abandonment of rules, fewer fans, fewer sachets, gloves growing simpler, men daring to sweat, women leaning closer with less fear. The court's fear of water hasn't changed, but their worship of perfume is cracking. Because what good is smelling divine if the divine nose is broken? That night alone in his chambers, Louis removes his wig and presses a linen cloth to his brow. He winces, not from scent, but from memory. He lights a candle. No incense, no oils, just wax. It's quiet, and the wax burns clean and scentless. It's well after midnight in Versailles. The torches in the galleries have burned low, casting long, flickering shadows across the checkerboard floors. Most of the palace sleeps, or at least pretends to, but if you listen closely past the rustle of rats and the creak of ancient beams, you'll hear something else. Water. Dripping. Trickling. Splashing softly. You follow the sound, gliding barefoot past slumbering guards and curtains still warm from candlelight. Down a servants' corridor, through a narrow door left slightly ajar, and into the forbidden. A washtub, half full, still steaming. This is the underground Versailles, the hidden world of secret baths. The moonlight spills across the flagstones, catching the glint of a silver soap tin and a discarded silk robe. You pause, barely daring to breathe, as a figure emerges from the steam. It's the Marquise de la Tour, naked, pale, radiant, but not in the courtly sense, in the human one. Her hair is pinned up, her skin dewy, her eyes closed as she presses a damp cloth to her neck. The silence is holy, sacred, and treasonous, because to bathe in Versailles is not just private, it is shameful. You retreat before she sees you. Footsteps silent, heart thudding. You've just witnessed one of the court's most tightly kept secrets, the ritual bath. Not a luxury, not a routine. A risk, a rebellion. Historians still debate who did it first. Some say it was a baroness with a medical excuse and inflammation of the joints soothed by warm water. Others point to a military captain battle-wounded and allowed to soak his foot in a tin basin. But once the precedent was set, the noble dominoes began to fall. Not in public, of course. Never openly. But behind closed doors, under layers of lace and gilt, the tub began to return. The trick was simple. If you got caught, you said it was therapeutic. Not vanity, not hygiene, certainly not comfort. I was prescribed it for the nerves, a duchess once explained after being found in her shift, ankle deep in lemon-scented water. Doctor's orders. The doctor in question had no idea. The hypocrisy was almost comical. Nobles who would scorn a chambermaid for rinsing her feet now quietly hired physicians who prescribed sponging the chest with chamomile water. Others commissioned copper tubs disguised as planters. One countess had her basin built to collapse into a bookshelf if anyone knocked. In the dead of night, maids would sneak pitchers of heated rainwater past guards who thought it was just tea. The smell of real soap, sharp alkaline, would be masked with mint leaves and cloves. And when morning came, the scent would fade and powdered wigs would rise again, as if nothing had happened. One young viscount even bathed with his valet, believing that shared shame diluted risk. They took turns rinsing each other's backs in a hidden stone alcove, giggling like schoolboys as they scrubbed off weeks of rose oil grime and silent regret. You make your way now to one such chamber. It's located just beyond the Queen's old dressing room, a forgotten closet with a drain carved into the stone floor. The smell hits you first: soap. Real soap. The room reeks of lavender lye and warm iron. A tub sits half-drained and next to it a towel still damp. You pick up a small vial from the table, no label, just a wax seal. You uncap it carefully. It smells like childhood, like something that doesn't belong in Versailles. Honesty, maybe, or humility. These secret bathers aren't trying to overthrow the court. They're not philosophers or radicals. They just want to feel human again. But the stakes are high. When the Duc de Richelieu was caught emerging from his private bath, freshly rinsed and positively glowing, he tried to play it off as an experiment. A Turkish curiosity, he claimed. A study in exotic customs. He was nearly exiled. Not for the bath, for the idea of it. Because the danger of bathing isn't in the act, it's in the example. If one noble can be clean, others will ask why they aren't. If someone breaks the rule and feels better, it threatens the entire structure of Versailles, the powder, the perfume, the rot wrapped in silk. You remember a whisper in the halls just last week. They say the Queen once bathed. Just once. It was said in tones you'd expect for adultery or heresy. The story goes that during a bout of fever, she'd demanded a basin be filled with rose water and milk. She'd slipped in for 5 minutes, 10 at most. No one saw her. But the next morning her skin was clear. Her eyes were bright. Her maid was dismissed. The Queen never spoke of it again. Some say the king knew. Others say he simply chose not to ask. Either way, the curtain fell over that chapter, and Versailles powdered on. Still the rumors grow. A general returning from the front is said to have brought a portable bathing tent. A noblewoman supposedly travels with a collapsible tub hidden in her luggage. A bishop's niece is rumored to have a soap recipe made from crushed rosemary and goat milk. Each story is met with gasps, then silence, then imitation. Because beneath the wigs and the waistcoats, the sores and the scented gloves, lies a simple truth: everyone wants to be clean. They just don't want to be seen wanting it. As you return to your chamber, you catch the scent again. Subtle, fresh, like wind through pine. Someone nearby has bathed. Recently. Carefully. Shamefully. And you think how strange that something so natural should feel so revolutionary. The Sun King is fading. You hear it whispered through the corridors now beneath the rustle of silk and the crackle of candle wicks. His gait has slowed. His voice, once sharp and theatrical, now emerges in hoarse murmurs. His meals go half-touched. His scent, once masked with an orchestra of colognes, now seeps through like truth under varnish. You walk softly through the gallery of battles, your footsteps echoing under frescoed ceilings, and feel the weight of silence settle over Versailles, like a funeral shroud sewn in gold thread. Louis XIV is dying, and not with grace. The royal physicians gather daily, their hands trembling more than steady, their advice growing ever more absurd. Pigeon liver tinctures, crushed emerald paste. Boil the urine, one mutters. Listen to its song. But the king no longer listens. He lies in bed now, propped up by embroidered pillows, his robe open just enough to reveal the ravaged skin beneath. Red, swollen, leaking. A courtier trying to discreetly mop the infection from his ankle accidentally gags. The sores have spread. The room stinks of honeyed bandages, rotting skin, and quiet despair. And yet still, no bath. Not until a priest enters. Father Antoine. Old. Worn. Less interested in flattery than most. He kneels beside the bed, leans in close, and whispers, "Your Majesty, allow your body the cleansing of water. If not for health, then for your soul." The room stills. You swear even the tapestries lean forward. A bath. The word itself hangs in the air like a dropped crown. Historians still argue whether it was faith or fever that softened the king in that moment. But Louis does not rage. He does not banish the priest. He simply closes his eyes. A single tear escapes, vanishing into the powder on his cheek. And he nods. The palace explodes in motion. Servants scramble for copper tubs long buried in storage. Water is drawn from the deepest wells, heated in batches, cooled again so as not to shock his sacred blood. Soap is discussed, then rejected, too harsh. Instead, rose petals, wine, and a few drops of orange blossom oil. The great bathing chamber, unused for decades, is reopened. Cobwebs cleared, curtains drawn, guards posted to keep the curious at bay. And then they carry him, the king wrapped in linen, and shame is borne down the corridor like a saint in reverse. Eyes closed, skin cracked. A monarch humbled by the one thing he spent a lifetime avoiding. Water. You're there when they lower him in. The steam curls gently around his face. His breathing hitches, then slows. He sinks a little, then floats, then rests. The sores bleed faintly into the water, and the perfume burns away. For the first time in years, his body is not masked, and he looks human. A servant weeps silently. Another crosses himself. The bath is brief, maybe 10 minutes. His limbs are too fragile, his pulse too slow. They lift him gently back into linen, wrap him in warmed towels, and return him to bed. He never speaks again. But that night, the windows of Versailles are thrown open, and the smell, it changes. The next day, the court wears black. Not mourning, yet anticipation. Ministers begin drafting declarations. Dukes adjust their alliances. Perfume merchants brace for a drop in orders. And Louis, he lies still. The sores are clean now, dressed in fresh linens. No longer bleeding, but not healing. Just waiting. You pass his chamber once more late in the night and catch a faint smell of steam and roses. A ghost of the bath. A memory. Some say it bought him one more day. Some say it damned his legacy, because when the king allowed himself to be bathed, the illusion cracked. If he needed cleansing, what did it say about the court? If he was just a man beneath the powder, what did it mean for divine right? You hear the whispers even among the footmen. The bath made him real, one says, and that's what killed him. In the palace kitchens, someone starts boiling water not for soup, but for washing. Quietly, cautiously. In the gardens, a young maid rinses her hands without hiding. In the servants' wing, someone scrubs the floor with actual soap. Because once the king bathes, the court cannot pretend anymore. You leave the palace that night and glance back only once. A window on the top floor is lit. Just one. Steam curls from it, like an apology. He dies in the morning, not with thunder nor the toll of royal trumpets, but with a breath so shallow it barely wrinkles the silk pillow beneath his head. You're there when it happens, or close enough. The priest murmurs something soft, a half-whispered Latin phrase that doesn't so much bless the moment as try to explain it. Around the bed, nobles bow their heads, hiding expressions that range from sorrow to calculation. In death, as in life, Louis XIV commands both reverence and ambition. The king lies very still. His eyes are closed. His mouth is parted slightly, as if he's about to speak. But he doesn't. Not now. Not ever again. What strikes you first is the stillness, and then the smell. For the first time in years, perhaps decades, Versailles does not smell like powder or amber or spiced vinegar. The death of the king breaks the spell. The servants no longer rush to reperfume the air. The doctors stop rubbing cloves on bandages. The priest snuffs the incense. Slowly, the veil of fragrance lifts. And what's left rot. Old sweat. Candied decay. The unvarnished truth of a man who refused to bathe and now returns to the earth like everyone else, regardless of titles, wigs, or powdered legacy. The palace windows are opened wide. Courtiers cough politely as the breeze rolls through the room, fluttering drapes and disturbing the carefully arranged order. A gust scatters a pile of scented petals placed near the bed. They swirl to the floor like fallen illusions. Historians still debate the exact cause of his death: gangrene from a neglected wound, some say. Septicemia. A lifetime of infections beneath layers of lace. But all agree on one detail: the room reeked. Not of flowers, of history, of endings. The linen wrappings around Louis's body are soaked in oils, but they cannot hide the truth. His skin is marbled with bruises. The sores have turned black around the edges. His feet, tightly wrapped, have gone stiff. There is no glory in this. Just silence and an unmistakable, irreversible smell. The courtiers remain for only a few more minutes. Then the rustle of silk and velvet as they begin to leave. A few sob. Most nod solemnly. Some whisper of succession, of who will rise, of what will change. Because something has changed. The king, once the eternal flame of France, has been snuffed out. And in that extinguishing, something else begins to breathe again. Air. Honest, raw, unperfumed air. Versailles, for all its splendor, has been holding its breath for 72 years. Now it exhales. You walk the halls as the news spreads. Servants drop to their knees in prayer or relief. Some run to clean. Others open doors long kept closed. A maid is caught tossing out a tray of half-used rose sachets. "It's over," she mutters, "isn't it?" And it is. The long, fragrant reign of the bathless king has come to its natural, unavoidable end. But not without legacy. In the days to follow, Versailles remains divided. Some insist the next ruler continue the tradition: powder over pores, silk over sores, perfume over pain. Others, especially the younger nobles, begin asking quieter, more dangerous questions. What if we cleaned? What if we aired out the tapestries? What if we bathed? You return to the king's room a final time. The sheets have been changed. The windows are still open. The candles flicker softly. And though the perfume still clings to the drapes, something about it feels weaker, like an aging actor bowing after his last performance. On the bed, the impression of Louis's body remains, a shallow outline. You reach out, run your fingers along the embroidered edge. The scent is faint now, just a whisper of amber smoke and old fear. You step back, and finally, let it go. The palace is quiet now. Candles gutter low. The corridors sigh. Beyond the window, the trees sway gently under the first light of dawn, and the air drifts through Versailles like a visitor from another century, cool, clean, and uninvited. You find yourself moving slower now, your thoughts softening, your breath stretching long. It's strange, isn't it, that a king so powerful, so absolute, so unchallenged in life could be undone not by war or rebellion, but by his own stubborn fear of water, that a man who lived in gold and mirrors could forget the simplest truth of all, that we are bodies, and bodies need care. Louis XIV ruled with brilliance, with cruelty, with theater. But beneath the powder and perfume, he was made of the same things we all are. flesh, sweat, breath, and eventually, stillness. You sit now at the edge of a quiet hallway, the scent of roses long faded, the tapestries still. In the distance, a fountain trickles. It always sounded beautiful. But now, you wonder why no one ever stepped in. Your eyes grow heavy. The last whispers of Versailles melt into the silence. And as the palace exhales its centuries of scent and secrecy, you too can let go for just a while. Let the burdens fall from your shoulders. Let the air around you soften. Let the water come. Sleep now. You've made it to the end. And tomorrow we'll start something cleaner.